Reborn in a world of ruins, Will is raised by an undead trio who teach him love, magic, and faith. Now, he must fulfill a sacred oath and face the unknown. Get ready for a magical journey in the faraway Paladin. A long, long time ago, at the very beginning of the world, the mana that made up the world was too great to hold its shape, and it swirled in a muddy mass of chaos. Then the first of the gods appeared. The gods said, "Let there be earth," and the mana solidified beneath the gods' feet, becoming the earth. The mana overhead thinned and became the sky. A boy suddenly cuts Gus off and reminds him that he only asked how words are related to magic. Gus annoyingly tells him to be quiet and listen, explaining that the creator god made the sun and moon and separated the land from the sea. Fire, wind and trees came next, followed by other gods as well as humans and animals. The boy inwardly says Gus the ghost is a little eccentric, and he can be a bit overbearing, but he's smarter than anyone else, and he teaches him things. Gus adds that the words and symbols, or the writing that the creator god used, are called the words of creation. These words, whether spoken or written, have power. He shows the boy that if you write the word Ignis, it defines the existence of fire, and how, when followed by the word for erasure, the fire is extinguished. Later the boy, William, is looking around at the status of different gods before a woman. Mary appears and tells him about the god. Gracefield before a skeletal warrior. Blood enters, telling Will that he'll get to eat some tasty meat today. While eating, Will cheerily thanks Blood, and Mary, so Blood says he'll teach him to hunt once he's a little bigger, since hunting teaches you all kinds of lessons, and Will is going to have to get used to taking lives. Will sadly looks away, so Mary angrily scolds Blood, reminding him that Will is still a child. Gus praises Will's intelligence, pointing out that he can already read and write at just 3 years old. He believes he should teach him some magic soon, but Blood starts squabbling with him. Seeing them, Will remarks that Blood looks scary and can be unruly, but he always keeps things light and friendly. He asks Mary when she baked the bread, so she stunningly says that's a secret. Will inwardly says the three of them keep a lot of secrets, like why they live here, and why there are no humans other than him. He's never met anyone but the three of them since he was born, and above all, he wonders why they're undead, admitting he can't ask them anything despite having so many questions, because he's keeping a secret from them as well, and that is that he's a human with memories of his previous life. As a baby, Will was initially scared of his undead guardians, but Mary's gentle care reassured him. As he grew, he became fond of her kindness and the world she showed him. One day, Mary took him outside to feel the breeze and see his surroundings. Overwhelmed, Will decided to accept this life in this new world and leave behind his unclear past. Some years later, Will wearily falls down, so Blood tells him that they have to build up his muscle and stamina first, since skills are useless without the muscles to back them up. Will asks if making up for your lack of strength is a skill, so Blood questions if Will thinks he can knock him down, and says he can knock him down with the right skill, but there will be times when that skill won't work for him. However, he can't separate muscles from his body. The brute force that muscles give you can solve most problems, and skills come after that. Later, Will casts a fire spell, but Gus annoyingly says his pronunciation is too precise. Given his talent, he needs to learn to control his accuracy, or he'll end up killing himself. Gus remarks that magic is a scary thing and asks Will if he knows why words have so much power. Will says he thinks that words are what define and differentiate the way things are. Surprised, Gus admits Will might be a genius after all, and explains that words have fluctuations. No one can say a word in exactly the same way twice, so the only way to use magic effectively is to let your instincts determine the ideal level. He tells Will that he's going to start by learning how to use minor magic skillfully and accurately, but he should do his best to get by without using that. Mary, meanwhile, teaches Will about the undead. Although his guardians try to shield him, Will begins to pick up bits of their pasts. Blood was once called a war ogre, Mary a servant of the gods called a daughter of Mater, and Gus a wandering sage, but they promise to tell him everything when he's older. Once, Will disobeys Mary's rule to stay out of the temple during her prayers. Inside, he sees her engulfed in flames, seemingly sacrificing herself. Terrified, he desperately tries to put out the fire, and burns his arms so badly that they scar permanently. Gus later explains that the bread Mary bakes for Will is a gift from her goddess, made possible through her prayers, but at a great personal cost. Mary reveals that she made a pact with an enemy called Stagnate to become undead. Her prayers invoke a fire that burns her. Will asks if it doesn't hurt. Mary mutters that it definitely hurts, so bad that she could cry, but even if she's betrayed her, even if she must endure pain in her retribution, she still continues to revere the Earth Mother. Mater never says anything, but she blesses her with bread for Will every day. That alone is more than enough saving grace for her. She apologizes for not telling him and hopes he continues to eat the bread. Will agrees and happily asks for a favor, asking her to let him pray with her, inwardly remarking that he wants to understand what Mary sees and feels, even if only a little bit. Gus tells Will that the original creation was destroyed by the evil gods that it had brought into existence. Thus began the age of war among the gods. Will asks if the big statues in the temple are the virtuous gods, so Gus confirms it would be that to a human, since among the legends told since ancient times is a battle between the lightning god Volt, the king of the gods who governs order and judgment, and his elder brother, the war god Iltreat. The elder brother had the advantage in the beginning, but Volt, with the divine protection of his wife, the Earth Mother Mater, banished the war god to the depths of the earth. The war god continues to lurk within the earth, vigilantly plotting his revenge. There are other similar stories, but they all take the same general shape. He says the concept of virtuous gods and evil gods is a distinction applied by those who place their faith in them. The priests would not be pleased with him saying so, but he tells Will to not speak of this to Mary, since the gods think about things based on different standards than them, and it is impossible for one with a human sense of good and evil to gauge their true intentions. Will cheerily tells Gus that he's pretty rock and roll since he doesn't fit in any mold. Gus mutters that children truly make up some bizarre words sometimes, but he does like the sound of that. A few years later, Will remarks that becoming free from obstructive thoughts doesn't mean thinking about nothing. You just block out the past and future and focus only on the present. He says he needs to offer all his current insignificant self to the gods, and then dive in deep as far as he can. Mary wakes Will up, saying this concludes the 5 days silent prayer. Will inwardly says he's done nothing but continuously pray for the past 5 days. Mary asks if he feels alright physically. Will confirms that he's fine, so Mary acknowledges that he's really remarkable since he's only 13. Will says that's only because he's been praying with her all these. He remarks that it's been 5 years since his arms were burned. Mary says she could heal the scars with her blessing, but he chose to keep them since Blood said they were his badge of manhood after all. Mary promises to make all his favorite meals for dinner tonight, and they leave the temple together. Gus shows Will a small stack of books and tells him to memorize all these by tomorrow, surprising Will, who says Gus's lessons became more difficult and there was a lot more to keep track of, but he stuck to it for all he was worth. And then his lessons became even more intensive. It's as if he wants him to get fed up and quit. Still, Mary and Gus were nothing compared to Blood, who says they should move on to their main event of the day and shows him a skeleton, saying this is Will's opponent that he caught in the ruins. He asks what the problem is, saying it's just a low-ranked demon's corpse. Will is surprised that demons can become undead too, as the skeleton suddenly gets up and starts attacking him. Will swiftly blocks his attack and instantly takes it out, surprising Blood. Will cheerily asks if this is what people mean when they say a trained warrior can kill with mechanical reflexes. Blood slowly agrees and annoyingly tells Will he wasn't that bad. Blood admits Will might be a genius after all, and suggests that they speed things up and try something harder, surprising Will. They head to the ruined city that Will always saw from the top of the hill. They walk through a passage in the underground and Blood explains that humans and dwarfs used to live here, and the blacksmith helped him out a lot. But now it's just a danger zone filled with mindless, wandering undead, which is why they never allowed Will to come here before. He stops and asks if he's got all his stuff. Will confirms that he has his sword, shield, bread, jerky, and a water skin. Blood says these things are everything for him right now and tells Will to escape from here now since he'll be waiting outside. He suddenly drops his lamp into the water and disappears, shocking Will. Will determinedly moves forward and finds an undead Vraskis demon, remarking that it's stronger than any opponent he's faced since they can use the words too. Will wonders what Blood would do and steps forward confidently. He rushes forward and attacks it with his sword. Even though the demon dies from the blow, Will's sword shatters. Will picks up the demon's weapon and surprisingly sees that it's a dwarven magic spear. As Will thinks about his guardians and his unknown biological parents, Gus arrives, and instead of having a casual conversation with Will, he summons a golem and challenges Will to a battle. Will focuses on the golem's weak points and manages to defeat it. But Gus escalates the fight with powerful spells like Stone Blast and others that restrict Will's movement. Will hurriedly considers using his new magic spear against Gus, fearing the ghost might genuinely be trying to kill him. In the end, Will chooses not to fight back and offers his life instead. Gus reveals it was a test, and they return to the others in silence. Will's training grows even more intense as he begins challenging dungeon-like environments that test his skills under pressure. During these trials, Gus teaches him about gambling, and one day, he tells Will that Blood is going to challenge him to a duel, but he unexpectedly asks Will to intentionally lose the fight. When Will asks to know why, Gus stays silent and doesn't explain, frustrating Will, who angrily leaves the room. For the next year, Will struggles with his feelings since he hasn't confronted Gus about the time he almost killed him during training, still unsure of his true intentions. Later, Mary and Blood talk to Will about the importance of vows in their society, explaining that when someone comes of age, they dedicate themselves to a god and take an oath that defines their path in life. As Will listens, he begins to think about which god he might choose and what kind of vow he wants to make. Will is doing pull-ups to when Blood interrupts and says that's enough, acknowledging that Will has gotten a lot stronger. Will asks what they're going to do today, so Blood shows him a flask and says it's time for this today. He says he thought they could drink together. He made it by putting honey in some forest grape juice. He suddenly stops, so Will asks what's wrong. Blood mutters that he just remembered how, this winter solstice, Will is going to be an adult. He says a man has to get used to this stuff. Will asks if Mary will be mad if they do that. But Blood says they'll keep this a secret, and it will be between just them both, after which they cheerily start drinking. Later, in their drunken state, they wearily leave together, and Blood says they're going to take a little peek at Mary while she's changing. Will drunkenly says they'll get in trouble, but he accidentally falls into the room while Mary's changing. Mary angrily asks Blood what he made Will drink, so he hurriedly says they were just going to have a little peek at her while she was changing. Will is about to say he told Blood they shouldn't do this, but Mary slaps him on the face. The next morning, Will slowly wakes up and goes to wash his clothes. Blood starts laughing upon seeing him, but Will annoyingly tells him to be careful and inwardly mutters that today is the day of his battle with Blood. Once this is over, he'll probably be leaving this temple by spring. He remembers Gus asking him to lose the duel on purpose, but annoyingly stops thinking about it. Mary arrives to help him get changed and starts helping him put the armor on, saying he'll be an adult from tomorrow, and asking if he's decided which god he's going to swear his oath to. Will says he's got an idea and puts his helmet on, smilingly telling Mary that he's going to win today. Will goes to meet Blood, who asks if he's ready. Will affirms this, so Blood says they should go over things one more time. No magic, no trying for instant kills, otherwise anything goes. If anything happens, Mary will fix it with her blessing, The first to admit defeat or become unable to fight loses. The duel begins, and Blood tells Will to try not to die. Blood relentlessly starts attacking Will, who inwardly remarks that if he takes just one solid hit, he'll be out of the fight. He tries to get in close but fails, so he mutters that it's a challenge to avoid one of Blood's strikes perfectly, but if he receives one with just his sword, it will shatter along with him, so he questions how he survives the strike and gets into the gap between them. He says there's only one answer and manages to knock Blood down, but he holds Will's sword between his ribs and holds a blade to his throat. Will slowly concedes and acknowledges that having no muscles really is an advantage. Mary angrily tells Blood that he said he wouldn't use the trick where he uses his ribs to trap an opponent's weapon. Will is shocked to learn that Blood did this when he was alive, and can't believe he survived, so Mary says he wouldn't have without her blessing. A while later, Blood tells Will that even if he wasn't able to beat him, what he's accomplished is still remarkable. He says he would have taught him a killer slash or secret technique if he had one, but he doesn't. The way he fights and the way Will fights aren't the same because his goal was to never raise him into an imitation of him, so the moves that he relies on won't be the same for Will. He tells Will to make sure he can use all the things he's learned at any time. Both he and Mary have already taught him everything important, but to mark his new independence, Blood rewards him with the demon sword Overeater, a powerful weapon capable of destroying even echoes of gods and reviving its wielder. Blood warns Will not to rely on the sword too much, as it could cost him his life, and Will thinks about the trust Mary and Blood place in him, wondering if he is truly worthy of their confidence. After the duel, Blood shares the history of the demon sword and begins explaining how he, Mary, and Gus became undead, since they all agree that Will is old enough to hear the truth. 2 centuries ago, a demon lord appeared, leading a vast army of demons to devastate the continent. These demons acted as sacrifices to the Lord of Dimensions, a deity worshipped by evil gods like Stagnate. Their destructive campaign strengthened the evil gods, triggering a war between good and evil forces. The demon lord was extraordinarily powerful, capable of creating demons from his own flesh, not influenced to magic, and vulnerable only to blades. Mary, Blood, and Gus reveal that they were part of a team tasked with defeating the demon lord. Gus used magic to eliminate the lesser demons, Blood fought the demon lord in direct combat, and Mary supported them with healing. Despite their efforts, Blood couldn't defeat the demon lord and resorted to sealing him away. At this critical moment, Stagnate intervened, offering them a deal. He would destroy the remaining demons and allow them to guard the seal forever if they agreed to become undead. The trio accepted and became undead guardians tied to the seal. For 200 years, they upheld their duty until demons brought Will to the temple, intending to sacrifice him to break the seal. After defeating the demons, Mary, Blood, and Gus faced a difficult choice. Gus argued against keeping Will, but Mary and Blood wanted to care for him, and eventually they all agreed to raise him, giving him a chance at a future beyond the sealed lands. Will realizes why they had kept this story from him. He was originally meant to be a sacrifice. Although the truth is painful, he feels grateful for the love and care they gave him, and vows to honor their sacrifices and considers visiting them in the future to say goodbye properly. However, it's revealed that the pact they had with Stagnate had a hidden consequence. Their bond with Will weakened their connection to the seal. Now Stagnate has come to claim their souls, but Gus steps forward to fight him and hurriedly tells Will to leave with Blood and Mary. Will watches in surprise as Gus performs a quadruple cast, which is normally the ultimate destructive magic that reduces all to nothing and is only usable by several people working together. Gus swiftly defeats Stagnate and turns around to see that Blood and Mary's souls are still intact. He admits it would have been scary for Will, so Blood apologizes to him, acknowledging that it really turned out just as he thought. Mary says she was hoping they could hold out until Will was ready to leave, and Gus smiles, muttering that they've both made their decisions, and he's not so unreasonable that he would demean the intentions behind their choice but it has all worked out. However, he suddenly gets attacked from behind and Mary and Blood's souls are sucked away, shocking Will. Stagnate suddenly appears in front of them, saying he's surprised Gus was able to destroy his body all on his own, had he not divided his strength into two bodies. That would have hindered him for quite some time. He grabs Gus by his neck, commending him and admitting he is indeed an exceptional sorcerer. Since it would be a shame to destroy him, he decides to wait until he's lost his attachment and throws him away before slowly approaching Will. He says he did well and thanks him, saying these great heroes formed contracts with him and become the highest-ranking undead with the condition that, when they eventually lost their attachment to the High King, they would fully become his servants. He tells Will that because of him, the sage's attachment has weakened and the war ogre and beloved daughter lost theirs completely. Will depressingly collapses, remarking that he wanted to do things differently this time. Stagnate sees that was quite the shock for him, and suggests that he join his army since Will watches in surprise as Gus performs a quadruple cast, which is normally the ultimate destructive magic that reduces all to nothing, and is only usable by several people working together. Gus swiftly defeats Stagnate and turns around to see that Blood and Mary's souls are still intact. He admits it would have been scary for Will, so Blood apologizes to him, acknowledging that it really turned out just as he thought. Mary says she was hoping they could hold out until Will was ready to leave, and Gus smiles, muttering that they've both made their decisions and he's not so unreasonable that he would demean the intentions behind their choice, but it has all worked out. However, he suddenly gets attacked from behind and Mary and Blood's souls are sucked away, shocking Will. Stagnate suddenly appears in front of them, saying he's surprised Gus was able to destroy his body all on his own, had he not divided his strength into two bodies. That would have hindered him for quite some time. He grabs Gus by his neck, commending him and admitting he is indeed an exceptional sorcerer. Since it would be a shame to destroy him, he decides to wait until he's lost his attachment and throws him away before slowly approaching Will. He says he did well and thanks him, saying these great heroes formed contracts with him and become the highest-ranking undead with the condition that, when they eventually lost their attachment to the High King, they would fully become his servants. He tells Will that because of him, the sage's attachment has weakened and the war ogre and beloved daughter lost theirs completely. Will depressingly collapses, remarking that he wanted to do things differently this time. Stagnate sees that was quite the shock for him, and suggests that he join his army since he can continue to live harmoniously with the three of them that way. Mary cheerily admits it was rather exhilarating to see Stagnate's pale face being erased, and Blood suggests that maybe all three of them could take the other one down with them. However, Will realizes they're faking it and sadly looks down. They jokingly tell Will to just be content to accept everything they've taught him as their farewell gift and believe he'll be just fine, but Will slowly reveals that he's not who they think he is. He reveals that he has memories of his past life and admits that he was an absolutely useless person, so when he was reborn, he thought he would live his life right this time, but he just made them suffer without knowing anything. Even in his past life when his parents died, he has no idea how he felt. After all the trouble he caused for them, he doesn't even know if he cried. He dejectedly admits he's garbage, but Mary tells him to grit his teeth and suddenly slaps him, declaring that his mother will not allow him to hurt himself any further and saying he's always been serious and earnest. She questions why he feels so shaken just because Stagnate upset him and says that if he feels so much regret just because his memories are vague, there's no reason why someone like him wouldn't cry. She tells him to stop kicking himself, so Will remarks that he's fine now and asks them all to let him protect them. Will decides to confront Stagnate alone to protect their souls. He prays to the gods for strength and heads into battle. When Will faces Stagnate, the undead god mocks him and summons other dead heroes who once fought alongside Mary, Blood, and Gus. These undead warriors attack relentlessly, but Will hurriedly fights back. Impressed, Stagnate offers Will the chance to become immortal as an undead, promising eternal life with his loved ones. Will pretends to consider the offer, but Stagnate, suspicious of his intentions, strikes first by summoning a venomous snake that bites Will, leaving him unconscious. Will wakes up in a starry realm he recognizes as familiar. There he meets Gracefiel, the goddess of rebirth, and remembers encountering her before. She explains that the falling lights he sees are souls traveling between worlds to keep the cycle of reincarnation moving, preventing stagnation. Inspired by the beauty of this process, Will recalls why he rejected Stagnate's offer. Becoming an immortal undead would trap him in a meaningless existence, repeating his past mistakes without growth. He determinedly decides to serve Gracefiel as her champion, promising to uphold her ideals of renewal and progress, after which Gracefiel blesses him and sends him back to the mortal world before beckoning him towards the temple, seeing which Will desperately rushes to the temple. Realizing it was all a bluff, and that Stagnate was pretending to be consumed by rage, because he's after Blood and Mary. Will hurriedly says he can return Gus, Mary and Blood to the cycle of rebirth and death. That's what he was being cautious of. He weighed Blood and Mary's souls against the risk Will posed and tried to play the fool. Will enters the temple to see Stagnate, who has Gus restrained and unable to help. Will charges towards him, but realizes it's no use since he won't be able to get to him in time. He borrowed the strength of a goddess, and finally managed to stand on even footing with him. But then he fell for a trick like that, and now it's all over. Suddenly, the goddess Mater intervenes, brushing Stagnate's hand away. Will realizes Mary had been forgiven all along. Mater never resented Mary at all. Mary never sought forgiveness, nor did she expect lenient treatment. That's why she continued to watch over her and admonish her as she wished, and she's kept that up for 200 years, never revoking her divine blessing until Mary could forgive herself. He admits the Earth Mother, Mater that Mary worships, is truly a great goddess. This brief divine intervention gives Will a chance to act. He channels divine energy toward Mary and Blood, knowing that the divine torch still can't completely defeat Stagnate, since Mary and Blood aren't resisting, which means the divine torch will guide them back to the cycle, so Stagnate has to protect them. Stagnate desperately intercepts the attack and manages to stop it, but in the moment when he erases Will's technique, Blood attacks him from behind, and Will rushes forward as well. Stagnate tries to fight back with magic, but Gus quickly uses a silence spell to block him, recalling how he told Will that he will start by learning how to use minor magic skillfully and accurately. Will rushes forward and delivers the decisive blow before relentlessly starting to attack Stagnate, who wildly declares until Will surrenders to him. His knights will bring him no rest or repose. However, Will says that's the kind of thing the third-rate villain would say and finishes him off. Will wearily collapses and admits that was close, realizing that the ovary to Blood gave him. Gus defeating the double of the Echo and Mary's Earth Mother Mater buying her time, were all things the three have given him: the sword, the magic, and the prayer technique, and most importantly, the part that is essentially his core as a person. If he had been without any of them, he never would have stood a chance, so it's all thanks to the divine goddess's protection and the three of them. Mary and Blood happily celebrate him, and Gus smilingly says that he may not share blood, but he is still their child, so it's only natural that he could accomplish this. They happily decide to celebrate, and Gus goes to get something special, but as Mary and Blood get up, they suddenly collapse and realizes this is it. Blood remarks that he wishes they could be spared just one night, but it doesn't look like that will be happening. They admit Gracefiel has been exceedingly easy on them, since they might have vanished instantly under normal circumstances. Blood tells Will that this is the end for him and Mary, and they both apologize. Will starts crying and asks if something can't be done. Mary denies this and remarks that even if something could be done, they wouldn't do it. Blood says they got lost for a couple of centuries, but one could just call that a detour. Mary adds that parents should die before their children. That's the first rule of nature. Will sadly agrees but says he still doesn't want them to die. Mary and Blood comfort him, encouraging him to stay strong. They all share one last drink of dwarven firewater. Embracing the moment, and with Gracefield's guidance, Mary and Blood pass on peacefully, finally able to rest. Will is left grieving but determined to honor their memory. To commemorate them, Will builds graves for Mary and Blood, promising to return one day to visit. Gus, who remains alive due to a unique agreement with Gracefield, checks in on Will and explains that his deal with Gracefield keeps him bound to guard the High King's seal for another 10 years. After that, the responsibility will fall to Will. Gus also warns that Gracefield's power is nearly depleted from helping Will, and her limited number of followers means she can't maintain her strength indefinitely. Will understands that addressing this issue will be part of his new responsibilities. Before they part ways, Gus gives Will a special gift, a family name. Since Mary and Blood gave Will his first name, Gus bestows him with the last name Mary Blood to honor his parents. Will adds G as a middle initial to honor Gus, officially becoming William G. Mary Blood. They happily say goodbye to each other, and Will sets off. In a flashback, Blood from when he was a human asks the fortress general how he's doing and says it's only natural for two warriors to introduce themselves and say a few words before facing off. He swiftly takes it out and says these demons are just too boorish. Mary arrives, saying being told that by the likes of him must leave that demon at quite a loss. Blood asks how it went on her end, so she says she performed the funeral quite easily and stopped the transformation to undead. She sees that it looks like old Gus's group did just fine and Blood says it wouldn't have hurt for Gus's group to retreat. She questions how many days destroying the bridge over the Great Canyon will buy them. Blood says it'll be a few at most and admits they're never going to get anywhere unless they take out the High King. He mutters that it'll still be a one-way street and that there won't be any way back. He tells Mary she's not coming, but she remarks that she's a valuable asset in battle. Blood understands, but says she still isn't coming since seeing her die would make him sick. Mary smilingly asks if he couldn't at least add, "Because I love you" to that, since that would be pleasing for her. Blood hurriedly says he won't say something that irritating and mutters that he'll knock her unconscious if he has to. She understands and reveals that she is going to kill herself on the spot if he leaves her behind. Stunned, Blood sighs and tells Mary that if he manages to make it back alive, they should find some quite peaceful place to get married. Surprised, Mary agrees and they start walking, talking about what they will do. Blood believes they can ask Gus to tutor their children and says he'll be the strongest man around, even stronger than him since he will teach the child how to fight. He adds that he's already thought of a name for the child and reveals that they will call him William, meaning Helmet of Will, so Mary says she likes that name as well. Will takes out a demon, remarking that he's fought demons several times since he left the City of the Dead, as someone trained by Blood and the others, and after fighting an undead go, everyday demon riffraff are no match for him. It's been quite a while since he departed, but he still hasn't met any humans. All he sees is the occasional wild animal and bizarre, distorted demons. He sees that it's really cold and mutters that it's been 200 years since Blood and the others were alive, wondering if that means no humans have returned in 200 years, and it's cold, but not cold enough for snow. He reaches a deserted town and sees that there's a huge scar left by immense magic. He prays for the town and finds a broken bridge which doesn't allow him to go further. He admits this was obvious since the terrain probably would have changed in 200 years. He sets up camp for the night and says he's running out of preserved food. He can get bread by praying for the blessing and can purify water, so he'll be able to hold out for a while, but he still hopes he reaches someplace populated soon. The next morning, Will believes he should find something if he keeps going downstream, but he suddenly sees a boar rushing towards him and quickly impales it with his spear. However, he suddenly sees that the boar had already been pierced by an arrow. An archer slowly approaches him, seeing which Will admits this is not an ideal scenario and sees that they've both found their weapons in a place like this. he decides to show he's not a threat and wonders if he should drop his weapon. However, he says the person might attack him, so he questions if he should pray for the blessing and show what a devout follower he is. He tells himself to choose his words carefully, since he's an outsider with no way to prove his identity. However, he suddenly notices something and speaks to the person in Elvish. He tells the person he can see they are related to the elves. The man admits he's not wrong and takes off his hood to reveal that he's an elf, surprising Will. The boy asks Will if he finished off that boar and tells Will he took it from him since that was his quarry. Will is about to apologize, but he quickly stops himself and says he had no choice but to protect himself since it charged at him out of nowhere. He believes he should get a part of it since he killed it, so the boy agrees and they start negotiating. Will inwardly remarks that the silver-haired elf was a good negotiator, so he was mostly left at his mercy for the most part, but the elf agreed to give him the boar's shoulder in exchange for helping him butcher it. They decide to eat the liver now since it'll go bad fast and start eating. Later, the elf says Will doesn't look like he's familiar with the land. Will reveals that he's come from the south, confusing the elf, who tells him to just keep following the river downstream, and he'll reach a small town in a couple of days. He can figure out the rest from there. Before the elf leaves, he introduces himself as Menel, but says they won't be seeing each other again before leaving. Later, Will admits Menel was a bit crude, but it was still fun talking to him. He decides to indulge himself since he's close to a town, but when he's about to sleep, Gracefield suddenly grants Will a vision warning of danger involving Menel. Will hurriedly gets up, questioning if that was a divine revelation. He hurries to find Menel, realizing that a tragedy is about to befall a nearby village, and Menel is going to get caught up in it. He quickly protects two villagers, believing Menel's village is about to be attacked by raiders. However, he suddenly sees that arrows lying near him and realizes that Menel isn't the victim of this tragedy, he's the perpetrator. He hurriedly asks Menel why he's doing this, so Menel says he warned him not to follow him and fires another arrow at him. Will quickly rushes forward and confronts Menel and his men. However, Menel starts using fairy magic. Surprised, Will admits he doesn't have a strategy he can use against someone who can use fairies. In that case, he quickly slams his foot down, throwing off Menel's magic because of the impact. He mutters that Menel doesn't realize, if your muscles are built up enough, you can solve mostly any problem by force. He knocks aside the magic Menel's men throw at him and knocks Menel out, remarking that he needs to subdue the others too before anyone gets hurt or killed. The village chief, John, thanks Menel for his help earlier and explains that folks from many places, all with different ideas about law, drift to this village naturally. This village is in an area of Southmark known as Beastwoods, and it apparently falls under the rule of the Fertile Kingdom, but the law and authority of the kingdom doesn't reach these dangerous remote regions, so the area is dotted with villages populated by criminals, fugitives with no relatives, adventurers who scavenge the ruins, and other outsiders. He adds that he's one of them himself, so Will asks what's going to happen to Menel and his group. John says he doesn't know either and reveals that these are from a neighboring village about a day's travel from here. Neither of their villages are that well off, but he thought they had at least enough stored up for the winter. In desperation, they plan to raid the village as a last resort. Menel offers to sacrifice himself to save his companions, but John insists that all of them must be executed to protect the village. However, Will steps in. Using gold he received from Gus, he negotiates for the release of Menel and his group. Will explains his decision, guided by Gracefield's teachings, his personal hatred of demons, and his belief in protecting people whenever possible. Reluctantly, the villagers agree and Will strikes a deal. Menel and his group will help secure the village's safety, while the survivors receive care and shelter. Will and Menel leave, and he asks Will what they're going to do now, calling him his boss. Will asks if the demons have occupied the neighboring village and suggests that they just charge in since they don't have much time. Surprised, Menel reminds him that there are a lot of them, and have got demon beasts. Will assures him it'll be fine since he's used to them, so Menel admits he's right when he says they have to hurry since the people who've died might have turned undead by now. Will mutters that he needs to return them to the cycle before they get lost and end up stuck here, if that's true. Menel and will set up camp for the night, with Menel using magic to create a safe area for them to sleep. As they walk through the woods, Menel admits he's not great at having conversations like this and tells Will his only job is to guide him to their destination. He makes it clear he has no plans to fight demons, and when they settle down for the night, Will asks if they need to keep watch, but Menel explains that the fairies will take care of that. He instantly lies down. Will asks if they can't talk for a bit, but Menel says he's tired so Will should stay awake alone if he wants to. Will smilingly lies down as well, inwardly remarking that this was the first night spent with someone else since his departure. The next day, they reach the village. Menel scouts ahead and says the demons are performing a ritual at the temple. Will asks how the temple is laid out and how the demons are organized, so Menel draws it out for him on the sand, saying there's no ceiling and some of the walls have collapsed. They've performed a ring in the center to perform their ritual, and there are 2 commanders. He says those commanders are Vraska's demons, and they have several soldiers patrolling outside the temple. Additionally, he knows there is at least 1 demon beast inside. It has a human-like head and a lion-like body, as well as wings like a bat. Will says that's a manticore and reveals that he's studied them a fair bit. He says he's glad there aren't any more and proposes that they just go in head-on and crush them. Confident in his abilities, Will sneaks in visibly, ties up the manticore, and quickly defeats the Vraskas. Then, he attacks the demon beast, destroying it with a powerful spell. Menel takes out the remaining 2 enemies and says he just jumped in to fight because he could tell Will was winning. He admits there aren't many people who could tackle those demons alone and win, and says Will's strength is abnormal, even though Will believes the conditions were in his favor. Menel believes they've taken care of the bulk of their forces, so Will says all that's left is to clean up any surviving demons. With the fight over, they turn their attention to the villagers, hoping some survived. However, they see that most of the villagers have become undead and find a young boy among them who says he hid during the attack, following Menel's advice, because he trusted Menel to come back. He slowly reaches his hand out to Menel, who turns away. Confused, the boy asks why, so Will steps in, comforting the boy with a hug. He assures the boy that he did well and says Menel is just tired because it's been a long journey. Menel slowly agrees and holds the boy's hands, telling him to go to sleep now since he must be tired. Will helps the boy find peace and guides him back to the cycle of reincarnation, stunning Menel, who apologizes to Will for misjudging him, remarking that he thought he was just some rich boy with money and muscles who happened to earn a divine god's protection and got cocky, spouting nothing but useless platitudes. Will cheerily says he doesn't mind, noticing that there was a markedly pained look on Menel's face, but he still smiled just a bit. After this, Menel doesn't hesitate anymore. He held the hands of the undead and exchanged farewells with them. Will says it looks like they've checked all of the major locations since he doesn't sense any more demons. However, Menel says there's one more place and leads Will to a remote house where Marple, a ghost, is waiting. Surprised, Will inwardly remarks that this ghost appears to be close to the highest rank, so her soul must be extremely tough, so if she resists, his power might not be enough. He slowly reaches for his sword since he'll have to use a magic weapon that works on spirits if it comes to that. However, Marple assures Will he doesn't have to worry too much since she hasn't gone senile yet. Menel sees that it looks like Marple stayed behind because of some lingering attachment, but this kid here is a genuinely virtuous high priest, returning souls like her to the cycle of death and rebirth, as well as treating wounded people, are what he does best. He says they'll take care of the village and urges her to move on and reincarnate, questioning if there is still something she wants to say to someone. He offers to deliver the message for her, but Marple says he's been bad again and says she can always tell when he's lying, muttering that he's twisted, but at his core, he's upright and fastidious. She tells Marple that all this killing and stealing isn't for her, but Menel annoyingly tells her to shut up, questioning what makes her think she knows anything. He angrily asks what else he was supposed to do when she died and everyone else was starving. He asks if he should have prayed to the gods or something, declaring that the gods have never once helped him out. He annoyingly tries to punch Marple and collapses, wearily saying he's had enough and asking to let him die with her. He slowly says the life of a half-elf is too long for him, seeing which will inwardly says those with elven blood live hundreds of years. Even after they lose the people and places they love, it still doesn't end. Marple tells Menel to listen to her and reminds him that despite all that, the gods have given him a second chance. It is his last chance, so he should stop living like some kind of useless bum. He may hate the gods, but the gods will never stop loving him. Even if he doesn't notice it, they will always shine down on him, never growing bored or tired of him, so all he needs to do now is realize that light is there. She asks Will if he would mind taking care of this poor fool, assuring him that he's not a bad boy at heart. Will agrees, so Marple says as for the demons and demon beasts that attacked the village, she's sure they weren't strays. The stronghold where their boss dwells is deep in the forest, and he sends his demon minions all over the place from there. They command demon beasts and attack people, and it looks like they're routing all their efforts into some evil plot. She says she can't go and pass on without making sure someone knew this. She appreciates the offer, but mutters that she doesn't need his guidance because someone is already waiting for her. She decides to be on her way and tells Menel to take care. So many things happen in this world that can never be taken back, so he should stand up and face forward, as there are things he needs to do. She comforts Mel and slowly floats away, saying she'll leave the rest in their hands, so Will says she can rely on him. Later, Will inwardly remarks that the present state of this world is dark. At the very least, in this area, known as the Beastwood, demons and demon beasts still run rampant, never fully exterminated. No nation's laws reach here, so even among humans, robbing and mugging are widespread. Of course, as an outsider who is just passing through, he's not obligated to do anything. He could just walk right by it. A few days later, the villagers returned. Though they were shocked to see the state the village was in, they eventually gathered up their remaining farm tools and started digging holes to bury the dead, and they all laid them to rest together. The villagers also reveal that they had hidden supplies, so they can start rebuilding. Later, with help from the fairies, Will finds Menel deep in thought. Menel shares his story, revealing that his mother left the forest out of curiosity and came back with him. She died not long after he was born, leaving Menel to grow up being hated by everyone because of his half-elf heritage and how quickly he grew up. He remarks that life in the forest wasn't easy, but it was better than dealing with the hate outside. He explains how he once led a group of explorers who found treasure in some ruins. One of the group members betrayed the others by poisoning them. Menel had to kill the traitor and then fled back to the forest. There, he met a young Marple who took care of him. He became a hunter and lived happily with them until demons attacked and ruined everything. Fueled by anger and a desire for revenge, Menel almost gave in to despair, but Will's actions stopped him from losing himself completely. Inspired by Will and Gracefield's teachings, Menel decides to become a disciple of Gracefield and vows to make up for his past and live with hope for the future. He cheerily asks Will where all his power comes from. Will says it's not that he's strong, he just had amazing teachers. Menel decides to not pry and asks if he's ready to head back. Later, the villagers hold a party in which Will happily tells Blood and Mary that he thinks he might have found the first person he could ever call a friend. The villagers say they have to go to White Sails to get some supplies since the demons got all the livestock and destroyed a bunch of tools that can't be replaced. Will asks what White Sails is, surprising everyone. Menel asks if he knows this is the remote southern continent known as Southmark, and explains that around 200 years ago, Southmark was engulfed by a horde of demons, The 100 heroes took out the kings of the demons, but the humans abandoned this continent, crossing the sea to retreat to grassland in the north, since the fertile kingdom unified the southwestern region of grassland. They've been cultivating the land with the intention of reclaiming it, and White Sails is the port town that became the center for immigration from the north. A lot of folks with histories and aspiring heroes go there, as well as people who've received divine revelations. He tells Will that it's said Gracefield used to have a lot of devoted followers on the southern continent, and her followers were scattered in the Great Collapse. A villager adds that the one who managed to escape to grassland kept her name alive, but her following has still declined a lot. Will wearily wonders if doing something about all this was part of a mission the goddess gave him. He says they need to deal with the village first, but Menel reveals that the villagers here don't have enough money. Will asks if she wants to go to the ruins, saying they'll equally divide the loot. Later, Will says he never knew Menel was so good at scavenging ruins, so Menel cheerily says they did get enough money to rebuild. Because of it, they can even buy livestock and new tools. They suddenly see two adventurers desperately running from a huge ape and see that they're a halfling and a hawker. The girl annoyingly throws a rock at the gorilla, but Will hurriedly shields her, inwardly remarking that Blood told him that when facing a wild animal, the moment you break eye contact, you lose. He determinedly tells the gorilla to come at him if it wants to. The gorilla stares at him for a few moments before turning around and running away. The girl excitedly asks Will who he is, since not many people can stop an agitated gorilla just by looking at it. She introduces herself as Robina Goodfellow, saying she's a troubadour who sings, dances, and goes where the wind takes her, so he can call her B. She adds that the dork over there is Antonio the hawker, who she calls Tonio. The company he works so hard for went under, so now he passes himself off as a hawker on remote country roads. Tonio explains that he is on his way back to White Sails, his home base, and gratefully thanks Will since he really saved their hides. Menel introduces himself and says they were just heading towards the town to do some shopping, and Will introduces himself as well, saying he's a priest in service to Gracefield, the goddess of light. B asks if Gracefield is the one they love in the southern continent, and says she didn't know there were warrior priests worshipping her. Menel agrees, saying Will may look spacey, but he's pretty skilled since they hardly ever get attacked by beasts when they're walking together. B excitedly asks if he means the beasts know how strong Will is and avoid him. Tonio confirms that they mostly see more since this area is after all called the Beastwoods. Menel sees that they've lost their guards. Mel offers to let Tonio and B go with them, so Tonio agrees to introduce them to a dealer he knows in White Sails. When they reach a village, Will inwardly says B and Tonio warmed up to them quickly. Tonio has a gentle demeanor, and he's good at getting close to others. As for B, she doesn't seem to have any concept of distance from people. B's music draws in a crowd, making it easier for Tonio to sell his goods, seeing which Will cheerily mutters that every time they walk into a village, she goes wild and gets everyone in it. Menel says she's always like that and is impressed she doesn't get tired. Tonio approaches Will and asks if his blessing can invoke heal sickness and injury. When Will affirms this, Tonio says he has a proposal for him. Will heals a girl whose mother asks how much they owe her. Will assures her it's fine, they can offer their gratitude to Gracefield, and if Tonio has anything they like, they can buy something from him. This not only boosts their income, but also spreads goodwill and faith in Gracefield. Later, they decide to stop for the night, and B shares a story about 3 legendary heroes, Blood, Gus, and Mary. She recounts their early adventure in slaying a wyvern before they became famous. In the tale, a child offers to help save a half-elf from a dragon. The heroes use Mary as bait, while Gus casts Earthbind to trap the beast, and Blood kills it. Afterward, they give the child and the half-elf a dagger and some gold, urging them to start fresh elsewhere since the village won't accept them. Gus calls this an investment, explaining that the two must grow strong and repay him when the time comes. He gives them his true name as a symbol of trust. The half-elf, still alive, waits for someone who knows that name to return and fulfill the promise. Surprised, Will dreams of one day crossing the ocean to meet people who remember these legendary figures. Tonio, curious, asks Will what he personally wants from life, so Will tells him about his background and admits he wants to explore the world and discover his own path. As they continue traveling, Tonio tells Will that a new ruler has taken over the fertile kingdom. His legitimate heir, Prince Owen, succeeded him, but he falls short of his father, and the lords have suggested that now is the time to advance south. But this hasn't had any effect on Southmark yet. The king's brother, who was dispatched by Whitesails, is a great man, the Crown Prince Ethel. He comes from a different mother than the King Owen, but he excels with both the king and the pen, and it is due to his rule that the government of Whitesails continues to run. B excitedly shows Will Whitesails, and he happily says this is just one symbol of what Blood, Mary, and Gus gave their lives to protect. Will sees that Whitesails is a very advanced city with a real sense of freedom. B shows him the accessories in style scene which he realizes people can afford to think about fashion here. He's surprised by the fact they have streetlights as well as public baths and quickly heads to one. After that, they go eat, and Will happily says he hasn't eaten anything like this since he left the temple. Since Will is a priest, he visits the local temple to pay his respects and is surprised by how big it is. At the temple, Will introduces himself as someone blessed by Gracefeel, his goddess. This causes a problem because Gracefeel is nearly forgotten, so Will needs to prove his connection through a prayer similar to detect good and evil. Unfortunately, the priests who can perform this test are unavailable because they are dealing with demon beast attacks. Bart Bagley enters and asks how he would know that Will isn't just some suspicious individual using her name for some insidious plot. Will admits he has every right to be suspicious and asks if there is anything he can bless to prove himself. Bagley sneers, saying novices like him are too quick to use their divine protection. He tells Will that divine powers shouldn't be used lightly. Surprised, Will remembers Gus saying the same thing and admits he is right. Bagley asks what the teachings of the Goddess of Light are to him, so Will says light can only exist where there is darkness. Words can only exist where there is silence, and life can only exist where there is death. Bagley stays silent for a moment before ordering a priest to put Will's name in the registry and show him around the temple. The priest is about to say they haven't performed any prayers on him, so Bagley angrily reminds him what he just said before turning away, saying he needs to make an appearance at the Weaver Guild's banquet, so Will can spend his time as he pleases without causing any trouble and should offer some money. Once he's left, the priest says it must have been unpleasant for him to meet Bagley, since he loses himself in parties and pleasure-seeking. He's quick to anger and complains constantly. Despite all he says, he never uses his blessings, while the vice-bishop, on the other hand, is a wonderful, virtuous person. He hurriedly catches himself and asks Will to not tell anyone, that so Will assures him that he won't. After leaving, Will asks the others what they know about Bagley. They say they haven't heard good things about him since he's said to be vulgar and apparently has some influence behind the scenes at the city's commercial and industrial guilds. Alarm bells suddenly ring, and they realize a wyvern is attacking the city. The townspeople desperately try to run away, and the knights are quickly defeated. Will quickly fires a long-range spell at the wyvern, but it doesn't work, so Menel hurriedly calms him down and tells him to use his brain. Will agrees and quickly asks B. Antonio to lead the civilians to safety, while Menel uses his fairies to enhance Will's spells. Together, they manage to trap the wyvern in a spider web, causing it to crash into a courtyard. The wyvern breaks free, forcing Will to fight it directly with his sword. When that fails and the wyvern tries to breathe fire, Will hurriedly wrestles the creature, using raw strength to choke it and eventually break its neck. Later, the townspeople are weary of Will's power, but Tonio starts applauding him and thanking the gods for Will's help, while B starts singing, after which the townspeople give Will the nickname Wyvern Killer. Will and Menel are soon summoned to meet the prince, Ethel, who praises their bravery and thanks them for defeating the wyvern. As a reward, he asks Will what he wants, so Will requests soldiers to help eliminate the demonic beasts in the demon woods. However, Ethel explains that the woods are covered in a poisonous miasma that corrupts anyone who enters, making the request impossible. Determined, Will suggests using his own money to hire mercenaries to deal with the demons, but Ethel slowly says he must also consider the option of killing him. Will asks Ethel what he would tell everyone, and Ethel says he could say Will died from the wyvern's poison. Will reaffirms his vow and says he's committed to helping others. Although Ethel warns that Will's plan is flawed and could lead to consequences, Will convinces him to reconsider, helped by Bart Bagley's, who mutters that since Will is officially registered with his temple, moving forward without the bishop's involvement would overstep boundaries. Ethel then shares Will's idea to appoint him as a knight with the temple's endorsement, making him a paladin. This arrangement splits both the responsibility and financial burden, though Bagley reluctantly agrees. On their way back, Bagley's daughter tells Will about her father's stress. When the king sent the prince to White Sails, Bagley had to build alliances and manage the challenges of his new role. Despite the tension, Will thanks Bagley for his support, though he admits he's unfamiliar with evening prayers. Bagley says this is because of Will being trained under a long-lived race and arranges for him to receive updated teachings at the temple. Will later asks Bagley why he doesn't openly share that he can use blessings, despite his devotion, so Bagley explains that divine protection is given so priests can serve as instruments of God, and blessings should be used for the greater good rather than personal benefit. Misusing them for convenience often results in losing those blessings. While Bagley tries to talk Will out of becoming a paladin, he eventually agrees to help when he sees Will's determination to honor his vow. With Menel's support, Will begins recruiting mercenaries for his mission. Menel and Will head to a bar where they spot a tired-looking adventurer. Will remembers Blood telling him to always look at a swordsman's fingers, since one can tell by looking at his hands whether he'll allow any thoughts that prevent him from drawing any weapon. Will approaches the man's table and says he wants to kill the demon boss, the leader of the demons running rampant in the western part of the Beastwoods, whose subordinate demons are said to command demon beasts. The man mutters that his location is unclear, so just finding him will be hell, warning Will that they're talking instant death if they're ambushed during the search. He agrees to do it, saying all he needs is food and a bed, and it'll be even better if he can earn some pocket change. Later, B is writing an epic of Will in front of him as Tonio does the calculations and worryingly says livestock will cost them a lot. Will says he has an idea to deal with that and asks him to buy sick and injured cows since he can heal them with his blessings, and they'll get them for cheaper. Additionally, he also asks Tonio to start trade between the Beastwoods and White Sails. When B learns that they're going to include Rastov the Penetrator in their party, she asks to let her interview him. During the interview, B annoyingly says she can't get any good ideas out of him, remarking that no matter how many times she interviews him, it's always the same. She asks if reputation isn't important to an adventurer, and warns him that people with skills have been harmed by their bad reputation, after which Rastov agrees to hold a duel with Will when they return from the Beastwoods. Later, Will is officially declared a knight. Later, Will thanks the vice-bishop for knighting him and says he asked Bagley about it, but he said he didn't like to show people his pious side. A guy arrives and hurriedly takes Will away to their grappling matches along with Menel, Tonio, and B. Will meets Anna, Bagley's daughter, and inwardly remarks that a team of experienced priests who can all use the blessing as well as lead ceremonies was assigned to him. When they get reports of demons or demon beasts appearing, Rastov and the others would pursue them as a party. Will would intervene in any disputes the villagers had and would try to quietly settle them. This worked so well that other villagers started to ask for him as well, and when he visited other villages, B and her music were a huge help. And so they traveled back and forth across the Beastwoods, time and time again. He's surprised by how much the atmosphere has changed, seeing that a village that had such a dark cloud over it once is now full of laughs and smile. He admits making people smile and giving them hope is more magical than actual magic. However, as summer approaches, Rastov informs Will that Pip's party hasn't returned yet, even though they were planning to spend no more than 10 days investigating. Realizing something is wrong, Will organizes a search party with Menel and Rastov and asks him to put together parties of people who excel in forest exploration as well. Later, Will warns the adventurers there's a chance that Pip's party didn't simply get lost and wound up in the demon's base, so if that's the case, here will be a battle. During the journey, Menel takes a moment to thank Will, admitting that if it wasn't for him, he would have sunk as low as he could sink, but it's thanks to Will that he's here now, living for a respectable reason. However, Will says he should thank him since he knew nothing of the world and Menel saved him. He tells Menel he could just say that by looking at him, but Menel embarrassingly walks away. Later, they find the corpses of the adventurers and perform funeral rites for them. However, Rastov informs Will that there's a head missing, and they notice that someone might have ditched their clothes and ran down the valley to escape from whatever was attacking them, since there wasn't anywhere else to go. However, Will senses that there's something off about this and realizes it's a tap. They suddenly get surrounded by several beasts, but Will and Menel enhance their team with magical buffs and feel confident they can win. However, a monstrous beast, larger and more powerful than expected, ambushes them. Menel quickly tries to create a fortress to protect them from its attack, but it throws him away, critically injuring him before firing a powerful attack at him. Shocked, Will desperately tries to stop it and quickly uses a thunder spell, but a demon cuts his words short, and Will gets electrocuted instead. Overwhelmed by rage, Will draws the overeater demon blade and wildly rushes towards the monsters, taking them all out while blaming himself. He remarks that he feels pathetic and that he had wronged his guardians, but Rastov quickly snaps him out of it and urges him to focus on saving Menel. Will tries to help but wearily collapses. When Will regains consciousness, he finds himself in a nearby village. A local explains that his team retreated after the battle, carrying both him and Menel to safety. Though Menel survived, thanks to the magical buffs he received earlier, Will is physically and emotionally drained. He is advised to rest, but he keeps thinking about what he did and mutters that his strength creates an imbalance, leaving his companions unable to keep up. Will decides to head out on these missions alone and visits Menel, feeling that dragging his weaker allies into battle was a mistake because he wasn't able to acknowledge the difference between them. He believes he must protect others by acting alone. As he's thinking about this, Gracefield appears. Will senses her sadness and vows to end it. Acknowledging his past mistakes, he assures her that he is now clear in his purpose. With her as his guiding force, he vows to save everyone and everything within his reach. He vows to put a stop to her sadness right away, as her sword and her hand. Though Gracefield remains silent, he assures her that it's all right and says he will solve all of this on his own. Will walks through the rain, thinking about his plan to face the demon beasts on his own, but Menel appears in front of him. Will tells him to not worry because it'll be okay. He will kill the chimera and the whole herd of the demon beasts. If there are demons controlling them, he'll kill them too because that's apparently just the kind of monster he is. Menel angrily tries to stop him, but Will stops his punch and remarks that he can't have him following him. Menel doesn't budge and hurriedly tries to stop him, but Will mutters that he could break one arm. Without hesitation, he instantly dislocates Menel's arm and tells him to get someone to heal him. He starts to leave, but Menel refuses to give up and uses his spell to throw rocks at Will. Will says there's no point in using such a minor spell, but he realizes the rocks will hit Menel if he dodges and is forced to take them head-on. Menel furiously asks if he wants to do everything alone and kicks him in the stomach. He calls him a coward, but Will asks if he really had to go that far when they were only together because things worked out that way and there was no reason for him to go out of his way like that. Menel agrees, saying he has no reason to stop an emotionally unstable coward who's completely lost it just because he was defeated once, but he's his friend and friends stick together. If his friend goes nuts, he wants to do something for him. He tells Will that he doesn't know much about his own origins, and he's clueless about the world. There have been times when he was suspicious of him, but he's a nice guy. He knows he's trying his best to doing his best at everything, and trying to do things right. He saved his life. He saved that village. They traveled together. They fought together, and he enjoyed spending time with him, which is why he's grateful to him from the bottom of his heart for sending off those villagers. He declares that he doesn't abandon his friend's hearing, which Will slowly starts crying. Menel asks if Will still wants to fight, but Will gives in and agrees to talk instead. He realizes he was wrong to try to handle everything on his own. When they return to their group, they find everyone worried about them. Ristov explains that stronger people often feel the need to take on everything alone, which can lead to failure. With encouragement from his friends, Will decides to work as part of the team. Together, they start planning their revenge against the Chimera that had defeated them earlier. After days of preparation, the group returns to face the Chimera with a well-thought-out strategy. They start fighting and manage to overpower the monster, which had terrorized the Beastwoods. Will and Menel track the Chimera to an abandoned monastery, where it had set up a trap. Will believes that the demon's ultimate goal is to destroy the High King's seal, and says keeping the Beastwoods in chaos is important to their plan, as retaking the area would lead to the seal being reinforced. When the Chimera attacks, Will easily counters its first move, while Menel takes his position as a long-range fighter. Using sylphs, Menel deflects the Chimera's arrows, while Will creates barriers to block its charges. Working together, they weaken the beast before Menel calls upon gnomes to trap the Chimera, restricting its movement. Enraged, the Chimera unleashes its draconic power, but Will and Menel manage to defeat it. Menel uses spirits to pin the Chimera down, giving Will the chance to deliver the final blow with his magic weapon and spells. After defeating the Chimera, the group heads deeper into the monastery to face the larger demon they believe is behind the chaos. To their surprise, they find that Ristov had already slipped in during their fight and defeated the demon on his own. With the demon and the Chimera defeated, the Beastwoods begin to stabilize. Menel tells Will that the villagers are going to build a shrine for Gracefield, and Will happily realizes her following is going to increase because of this. Menel asks what he's going to do next, and if he's going to become the lord of a domain. Will asks what he's talking about, so Menel says he will be the lord of the Beastwoods. Will chuckles and says he's just a normal adventurer, but Menel explains to him that he's a paladin with the goddess of light's divine protection and the approval of both the country and the temple, so he has all kinds of power. On top of that, he has the authority to gather all these adventurers, and by arbitrating for the villagers, he essentially has jurisdiction over them. Will panics for a moment, but slowly agrees and asks Menel if he will stay with him, so Menel happily agrees before they're called by B. They walk forward, and Will inwardly remarks that he could maybe turn the city of the dead into a regular city where living people can laugh together, admitting that sounds like a wonderful thing to him.